I'm a teacher, and I wish I could tell you that my job is just about lesson plans, chalk dust, and after-school grading, but the truth is far more sinister. The students in my classroom have been playing something they call the name game, and it has consumed them in ways I never imagined. At first, it was subtle, like a childish chant. I overheard in the corner of the playground their voices weaving together in a strange rhythm that felt oddly rehearsed, too perfect to practice, as though it wasn't a game at all, but a ritual. They would sit cross-legged in a tight circle and whisper a single name again and again, each time louder, until it was echoing across the empty hallways after school. The first name they chose belonged to a quiet boy, Michael, who was always polite and never caused trouble. The next morning, Michael wasn't in class. His desk sat empty, but when I checked the attendance log on my computer, his status showed as present. I called his home, and his mother's trembling voice told me she tucked him into bed the night before, but his bed was empty when she went to wake him up. That night, I dreamed of Michael standing at the edge of my classroom, his lips moving silently, like he was chanting something I couldn't hear. When he woke up, the faint echo of children's voices was still in my ears, repeating his name. The following week, the game spread like a sickness. At first, I tried to stop it. I confiscated notes. I separated the students who whispered too much. I even threatened attention, but the chanting continued. They didn't care if I yelled. They didn't care if I stood at the front of the room with anger burning in my throat. Their eyes were locked onto me with a strange calmness, like I was no longer their teacher, but just another piece of the game itself. I watched as they singled out Sarah, a bright girl with a sharp laugh that usually lit up the class. They surrounded her at recess, their voices rising and falling in a disturbing cadence as they repeated her name. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. Over and over until Sarah broke down in tears. The next day her seat was empty too, yet she was still marked present on my screen. At night, the voices grew stronger in my dreams. This time, I saw Sarah standing beside Michael, both of them at the back of the room, their faces pale and blank, their mouths wide open as though screaming, but no sound came out. My sleep grew thin, my appetite vanished, and every time I walked into the classroom, I felt less like a teacher and more like a prisoner inside some cruel experiment. When I asked my colleagues about it, they only looked at me strangely and said they hadn't noticed anything unusual. But I swear on my own life, every hallway, every classroom was soaked in an unnatural silence, as if the entire school was holding its breath. By the third week, the children no longer bothered hiding the name game. They chanted openly during lessons, their voices low and rhythmic, a constant drone that burrowed into my skull. This time, they chose different names of kids who weren't even in our school. Kids I'd never heard of. At first, I thought they were making them up, but when I Googled those names, I found old missing persons reports. Children from other states, even other countries, gone without a trace. Each one had vanished years ago, and yet my students knew their names as though they had been whispering them for a lifetime. That was when I realized the name game wasn't just happening in my classroom. It was something much older, something wider, something far beyond anything I could understand. I tried to record the chanting on my phone one afternoon, desperate for proof, but when I played it back later that night, all I heard was static, and buried under the static, my own name whispered over and over. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking, and from that night onward, I began hearing my name in places where it shouldn't have been. In the creak of the floorboards, in the hum of the classroom lights, in the hiss of the radiator. My own name, repeated endlessly, until I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside or from inside my own head. The real horror began the night I stayed late to grade papers. The school was empty, the hallways dim, and the sound of my red pen scratching across pages was the only thing grounding me to reality. Then I heard it faint. At first, like a breeze. Teacher, teacher, teacher. My blood froze. It wasn't my given name anymore. It was the title, my role, my very identity. The chanting grew louder, spilling in from the vents, the walls, the floor. I stood up, the pen clattering to the desk, and stumbled toward the hallway. The entire corridor was dark, but at the far end, I saw them. My missing students, Michael and Sarah, and others I couldn't even recognize. dozens of them standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces pale and stretched into identical smiles, their eyes black hollows. They didn't walk toward me. They slid, their feet dragging silently, mouths opening and closing as they sang, "Teacher, teacher, teacher." I ran, but the school twisted into something I didn't recognize. Stairwells looped back into hallways. Doors led only to more classrooms, and everywhere. Behind me, the chant followed, relentless and suffocating. I finally burst into my own classroom, gasping for breath, and found the desks were gone. The blackboard was covered with a single word, written thousands of times. My name. The floor pulsed like breathing flesh, and from beneath it, I could hear knocking, hundreds of hands pounding, desperate to be let out. Now I don't know if I'm awake anymore. Days blur into nights, and the school feels less like a building and more like a living thing, feeding on me, waiting for me to break. Sometimes I hear my colleagues' voices, faintly, calling me in the distance. But when I follow them, I only find empty classrooms and broken chairs. My students still appear, always chanting, their circle growing larger as new names are added. Names I don't recognize, but somehow feel I will. Every time I try to leave, I end up back in the same classroom, the same chair with my name carved into it, as though the school has folded in on itself and trapped me inside. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. The chanting never stops, even now as I speak. I can hear it seeping into this recording, crawling into your ears. If you've listened this far, maybe you already feel it, the tug of the rhythm, the urge to say your own name out loud, to whisper it just once. Don't. That's how it begins. That's how the name game spreads. Because I'm a teacher, and my students creepy, the name game never ends. And once your name is spoken, you'll never escape it either. And if you still don't believe me, stay tuned. Because the next story is darker. Much darker. Don't click if you value sleep. But if you dare, open the next nightmare, and you'll understand that the name game was only the beginning.